And we're ready to start, if you'll hit the tape. In case you don't know the august body that's in front of you here, it's a fly. My name is Mike Jacobs from Louisville, Kentucky, and with me on the program, of course, is Ed Foote from Pittsburgh. We thought initially that we would have Ed do a styling clinic on singing calls at C1 level, and but particularly after the concert, we thought that might be inappropriate. So rather than do that, we're going to take a look at a number of concepts here tonight and then go further and examine a few other factors in our calling of challenge level. So without further ado, here's Ed Foote, and he will take a look at the concept of stretch.
One thing about Jacobs, he always has good mic technique. Took a while for that, though. Okay. We're going to look tonight at stretch and the stretch concept. There's a lot of misconception going on about what is the C1 stretch, what's the C2 stretch, what's the stretch used at C3, what's the difference between them. A lot of callers have misconceptions on where to call which and which type of stretch is really which kind of stretch. I know I was confused on this for a long while. I guess I was calling it the right way, but using the wrong terminology. I hear other callers doing the same thing, or some callers may be using the right terminology but want the wrong thing. So we're going to go through step by step tonight and explain the entire stretch procedure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to our session on mainstream.
I guess what we should do first is to get the square up so we can follow along with this. And we don't need 4 guys and 4 girls, since we don't have 4 girls, but since it's all position here anyway, it doesn't make any difference, right? So if we can just get 8 people up for a square. For those listening on tape, you should be able to follow this, I think, in your mind. If you can't, why get a set of checkers and you'll be able to follow along real easy. Let me get the square up there. Just any 8 people. No. This, no. If I'd known that's what you were doing, I would have stopped you earlier. Appreciate it.
A couple of words on our mainstream program first. Nothing original.
Okay, let's move right along on the square here, but otherwise we're kind of delaying on the tape. We need 2 people on the... And you don't have to understand the stretch or anything about it to do this, because we're just walking everything through. We need 2 more people there. Okay.
Now can we get a problem?
This is evidence of our trouble in our mainstream program.
I'm going to run through some of the various stretches after I'm done. If some of the rest of you have other examples or things you want to add to this, fine. That'll be all the better. At C1, we have stretch at C1, and the stretch at C1 in essence says do the call normal and then stretch. In some cases, we can be stretching while we're doing the call because that's better for dance styling and flow. But if we had to consider an overall rule, it is do the call normal and then stretch. Putting that another way is saying start together and then stretch apart. We start together and we end apart. Another way to say it is that the centers go to the far center as they finish the call, or as the call is completed, the stretch, those coming to the center go to the far center. All different ways to say the same thing of what we're doing with the C1 stretch. The stretch at C2 can be called the stretched, with an ED on the end, concept or formation, because here we're starting already stretched and we're coming back together. So at C C2, the stretch at C2, we start apart and we come back together, and then we do the call. We're apart, we come together, then we do the call. Another way to say it is the stretch at C2 is the centers work with the far ends. Of course, the typical example from the tidal wave of the stretch, wave, recycle, the centers go to the far end and then do the recycle. Another example or another way to describe the C2 stretch is that the formation is named. The C1 stretch, we don't say the formation name. We just say stretch recycle or stretch wheel and deal, which we know would be a Ferris wheel. The C2 stretch, we name the formation. We say in your stretched wave, recycle. We give the call. In your stretched two-phase line, do a wheel and deal. So that's another way to differentiate between the two stretches. That the stretch used at C2, we say in your stretched something formation, and then we do the call. So let's take some examples of this, and I'm going to take really several examples and just show, I guess, what we mean by the different types of stretches. I should mention also that in looking at stretch here, we're actually going to be looking at stretch from three lists. The C1 stretch, the C2 stretch. The C2 stretch is from tidal situations, but we're also going to look at the C3 stretch, which is stretched box, because some callers are misusing or misunderstanding what stretch is at C1, and they're calling stretched boxes, they're calling the C3 stretch at C1. So we really have to incorporate the C3 stretch also to get a total concept of the picture. Okay, let's have the head star through. From right here, if we said, and well, let's have the heads unstar through. I don't want to start with this one. I have this as my first example, but this isn't the best. Let's have just the heads back out to the right and make a line of four heads. Following the definition of the C1 stretch, in which we do the call normal, and then those coming to the center will pass through. If I say stretch square through 4, then everybody do a normal square through 4, go. And those coming to the center will pass through, and that would be the end of the call, stretch square through 4, and that would be the C1 use of stretch. Okay, everybody quarter in. Okay, if, however, from here we said in your stretched box, we have named the formation. That automatically takes it out of C1. We're now into C2, and since it's stretched box, the box is really C3. Whenever we name the formation, that means first we start apart and then we come together. We're saying stretched box. That means the centers are going to have to work with the far end. So the first thing they do is unstretch themselves by sashaying over. So centers unstretch by sashaying over. And now do the call normal, square through 4. And you can see here we end in a trade by, where before we ended in a completed double pass through. Everybody quarter in. Now, unfortunately, some callers, and I really place myself in this category too, because for a long while I think I was interchanging the terminology without the proper execution of the call. Some callers might just say, at C1, they might say, do a stretch square through 4, and they really want the stretched box. Other callers say stretch, and they want the true stretch. So obviously it's vital that we understand the difference between the two stretches, so that at C1 we don't call stretch square through 4, but we really want it's a stretch box square through. Okay, let's pass through wheel and deal. Now let's take another example. The C1 stretch, where we say stretch, we give the name of the call, coming to the center, will go to the far center. From here, if we called stretch pass through, stretch centers pass through, they pass through, and then freeze. But the definition says that those coming to the center must go to the far center, which means now they have to unpass through to get to the far center. Okay? Now, obviously, nobody would ever call that, right? That nobody would ever call that. But what is called at C1 is stretch pass through, and the caller really wants a stretch box pass through. If we say stretch box pass through, we've said the name of the formation, which means we have to have the centers go to the far end and then do the call. So if we say in our stretch box pass through, centers would pass through. That's unstretching. Now everybody does the pass through. And that's the end of the call, stretched box pass through. But it is not stretch pass through. And that's a big confusion point, and I've heard of several callers calling from the starting double pass through position, stretch pass through, and they want this. And what this really is the stretch box pass through, not the stretch pass through. Right, although it's used a lot at C2 because it's a very close relative of, once you say the stretch and the formation, you're really all in that same category. The problem is people working at C1 and really calling C2 calls, the C2 usage of the stretch, but calling with the name of the C1, and now everybody's all confused and nobody knows what's happened. Everybody quarter in. Okay, let's take some more examples, and I'll run through these examples, and if you have questions, we'll cover them. I recognize if this is all new to you, it will take you at least 15 times hearing it before it starts to sink in. That's what it took with me. It had to be browbeaten into me over and over, just the repetition until I could finally see it. Now maybe I'm slow. Maybe the rest of you get it in 7 or 8. Okay. Make an ocean wave right there. We'll do the C1 stretch. If we said stretch recycle, okay, everybody recycle. I don't think I wanted this, did I? Yeah, and then the centers would go to the far center, right? Okay. Do a normal recycle, which brings you to lines, and then this. No, not now. We did it. I'm re-explaining what we did. We did a normal recycle, and then the centers had to slide over to make the stretch. I'm repeating some of this for the tape if they can't see this. Let's do this again. Step up to a tidal wave. So first we do, at the C1 stretch, first we do the call, then those coming to the center go to the far center, and it's going to be a sachet. So we're in a tidal wave. Let's do a normal, we're going to do a stretch recycle. So first we do a normal recycle, that's part A, and then part B is the centers go to the far center, that's part B, and that's the end of the call. Okay, now step to a tidal wave. But if we say in our stretched wave recycle, that's the C2 usage, which means the two in the center work with the far two ends, and of course we know at C2 that they just do their recycle moving out to the far end. Let's do the stretched wave recycle. Okay. Okay, the next example. Step to an ocean wave. The C1 stretch. If we said stretch linear cycle, let's do a normal linear cycle because all we said was the word stretch and linear cycle, but the centers are going to have to pass through in the middle and then do the peeling to the right. Okay. Now, theoretically, we could have had them do a full linear cycle normally and then an unpass through in the middle to be technically following the definition. But since we want some sort of danceability in this, where we can blend our going to the far center with the call, we do, and that's what we did here. Yeah.
The same way, the attitude of the caller.
It is, and that would be just having another name for the same call. It is a grand linear cycle, but it's but we're not looking at. Yeah, so the fact that one thing equals another call here is really extraneous. Let's have the centers pass through, spin the top.
Okay, back to the music end of it. I've got some records here that I can.
Now this time we're going to do we're going to say in our stretched wave linear cycle. So when we've named the formation, the centers have to get over to the far end. So they get over there, and then you do the linear cycle on your far end, and you wind up in your 8-chain through position. Do a spin the top. Now, something that would be very hard, and I just throw this in because it's interesting, not that you would call this at C2. It's really more strong C3 or maybe even beyond. We can say in your stretched wave, do a stretch linear cycle, which means the center two would go down to the far end and do their linear cycle, but as you're finishing that linear cycle, then those coming to the middle would pass through, because we're combining both this time. We're doing the stretched wave, and then we're doing a stretch linear cycle. Now that's tough. That's tough, and that's really a very solid C3 use, but just another example of that. Centers pass through, spin the top. Another example from the tidal wave, the C1 use of stretch, where we simply say stretch and give the call, and then those coming to the center pass through. We could do stretch, explode the wave. So we do a normal, explode the wave, and then those coming to the center will pass through, and we have a completed double pass through, and that's the end of the call. Everybody quarter in, make an ocean wave. But if we name the formation first, if we say stretched wave, explode the wave, now the center four have to slush past each other down to the other end and then do a normal explode the wave. Okay, now that doesn't dance too good, but it's well, it dances good if you know how to, if you're good dancers the way you are. See? Okay. Okay, and what else do we have here? Trade by, veer to the right. Okay. Just as smooth as veer left. From here, a stretch, turn, and deal. And some people would see want those facing in to come into the middle and do a turn and deal, and that's confusing the use of Ferris with stretch. Since we're doing a turn and deal, it's right shoulders in our own line. So in our own line, we do a turn and deal, and then those coming to the center pass through. So they'll pass through. We have a completed double pass through, and that's the end of the call. Everybody quarter in, pass through, wheel and deal. One other thing, one other good rule to recognize, the question can be asked, you say go to the far center. Where is the stretch? To what center? Is it to the side of me, or is it in front of me? Because we really have two centers that way. We have our center to our side, and we have the center to the front. The rule is that the stretch is always along the line of four. Now, it may be a facing line, it may be a column, but our stretch is always related to the four people. It is never related to the two people. So, for instance, from here, if we said in our stretched box, pass through, why the centers pass through, and then everybody pass through, and our stretch is going along the column. We've never thought about looking to the side, because that's only two to the side. Our stretch is always along the line of four. Okay. Any questions or comments, or does anyone have any other examples that they think would help on this too? Yeah, Bruce.
Good music, good solid music in the middle helps them enjoy it more. Okay, this is really supposed to be an interesting lecture, and I suppose to make it interesting, we should all share ideas. If you have something that you'd like to be permanently recorded on the tape of this session, I suggest you take the microphone number one and give us your ideas. How many of you?
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. Everybody quarter in and make a tidal wave. Okay, now what? Yeah, I'm not sure I understand what the question was. Okay, I see. The question is from a tidal wave. Since on the C1 list it says from parallel waves, a tidal wave isn't parallel waves. So to call a stretch explode the wave from here would not be C1. But it follows the idea of the stretch introduced at C1 because the stretch introduced at C1 says stretch name of call, no formation name. Now, of course, explode the wave, we are naming the formation, but that is an oddity because the word wave happens to be part of the explode the wave name, so we don't consider that. So granted, technically, from here, stretch explode the wave is not a C1 usage of stretch, but it is that use of stretch, that phase of stretch that says start together and wind up apart. So this is that from a tidal wave, stretch explode the wave. That's a use of the stretch that's introduced at C1, but this particular formation should be used at C2. Now, I don't know whether I made that clear or not.
Something at the end of a phrase. Using music, I feel, I'm using music strongly phrased.
Okay.
I'm almost obligated.
All right, do a locket. So now we have parallel waves. Okay.
The pattern, the hoedown, which goes on and on forever, really doesn't. I find it very difficult in that regard to use
Stretch explode, yeah. Those coming to center will pass through, and then everybody face, and everybody explode the wave. Okay. Yeah, stretch shakedown. Okay, from lines facing out, stretch shakedown, and those coming to the center pass through. Okay, so those are parallel situations. So the tidal situation is that formation usage is not C1, but the concept idea is C1. It's taking the C1 idea, but not using that formation until C2. So obviously you can see that this whole thing can get a little confusing unless we really delineate the two different types of stretches. The one stretch says stretch and name of call, formation not named. The other stretch is in your stretched name of formation, and the centers then move down and work with the far ends and then do the call. Okay. Any questions by those sitting out? They really haven't done a whole lot of this because the people up here, I think, have done this. Yeah. Yeah, centers pass through and make a wave and lock it. Of the two different ones. Okay. We can do the same one we did before. The usage, we wouldn't use this at C1, but it's the idea of the C1 stretch. The stretch explode the wave. So we do a normal explode the wave, and then those coming to the center pass through. Stretch explode the wave. Because it started from a tidal, and we're limited on C1 to parallel formations. That's the only reason why it isn't C1. It's the use of the stretch concept that's introduced at C1. It's the use of that type of stretch at C1. It meets all the qualifications except it's from a tidal instead of parallel, so therefore we can't use it at C1. Right. Now maybe... Go ahead. Okay, now we have quarter in and make a wave, tidal wave. You have a tidal wave again. Okay, so we do a normal recycle, and those stretch recycle, it's a normal recycle, those coming to the center pass through, and it's really a sachet and wind up in facing lines. In your stretched wave recycle, you had, that's C2. Whenever you name the formation, it means start apart and come together. If you don't name the formation, you start together and go apart. Okay, in your stretched wave, and let's have Mike and John raise your hand. See, they're starting. We have a tidal wave now. We're going to do it in a stretch wave recycle. These two centers are working with the far ends over here, so they're starting apart, and then they're going to come together in your stretch wave recycle. Now, it wouldn't surprise me, as because of all the confusion on stretch that's been around, we haven't really developed the distinction too much between the lists. It wouldn't surprise me if this stretch explode the wave from a tidal wave might eventually become legal at C1 because it follows that same usage at C1. That might be something to consider on the next C1 voting, that formation is legal. No, by not naming the formation, but by using that formation. By using, at C1 now we can't use a title at all. And I'm saying possibly in the future we might make it legal to use a title as long as we stick and limit it to the C1 usage, the C1 use of stretch, which says, yeah, right. The C1 use of stretch is start together and wind up apart. C2 stretch is start apart and wind up together. That's a good way to remember it. That if you, the C1 use of stretch, which says, say the word stretch, give the call name, and that's it, means you start together and you finish apart. The C2 use of stretch says you start apart and you come together, and you must name the formation name. You must give the formation name. Everybody step to a tidal wave here. What started this whole ball rolling down the pike is that a lot of callers, and some of the top challenge callers, were saying from here, do a stretch recycle. And they really wanted a stretched wave recycle. And they just said stretch recycle. And that's wrong. But everybody was so used to calling it that way for so long that nobody thought anything about it, and it's taken a couple years for everybody to realize, hey, we should have been saying stretched wave, not just stretch. The callers were saying stretch recycle, but they wanted the stretched wave recycle. Well, that's not correct. Yeah. We have a tidal wave, centers run, tidal two-faced. From here, a stretch, turn, and deal. Okay, everybody partner trade. So we now have a left-handed two-face line on each side of our tidal line. Now, see that? Right. That would be in your stretched line. Yeah. Right. The formation is not legal, but this. So let me say for the tape what. Yeah. From this tidal line we have, if the call was stretch, turn, and deal, each line of four working with themselves only would do a normal turn and deal, and then the centers would sashay over. Yeah, smoothly. Okay. But if it was you're all facing out now, do a U-turn back, and as a couple on your own side veer to the right, that'll have you back the same way you were there. But if we said in your stretched line, and some callers would even say in your stretched line of four, and that's all right, just as long as we say the name of the formation, in your stretched line, turn and deal. Now the center two are going to work. No, you're going to work down to the far end, and we wind up in a right-handed two-face line. Okay, now we have parallel two-face, right-handed two-face, parallel right-handed two-face lines. And if we do a stretch, turn, and deal here, it's just the center. It's like a Ferris. The centers are going to move in and then turn in toward the center. We have our starting double pass through. Okay. Does anybody else have any other examples that they want to add in? Mike, do you have any that you wanted to? Yeah. Depends on where you start that from. Well, we're using a challenge definition of roll here, right? How do we just do it? Okay, we're back to a tidal two-faced line, and each. Once I get it set up, I'll say for the tape what it is. We have a tidal two-face line. Each line of four is a left-handed two-face line, and it's a tidal setup. Okay. Okay, from here, if we said stretch, turn, and deal, and roll, that's going to give us a left-hand column. On your own side, Bruce, you got to go back the other way. Stretch, turn, deal, and roll, and it gives you a left-hand column. Yeah, okay. Now that was a good example. Yeah, well, it's interesting that when you do the stretch, turn, deal, and roll from there, that one thing, the stretch was along the column of 4. That's a good example to see that the stretch is along the column of 4 and not sideways. That was I don't know whether they can do it again. Yeah. All right, we're back to this title line. Title two-face line. Each line is a left-handed two-face line. See, for dancing smoothness, technically what they could all do on their own side, turn and deal and roll, stop, and then the centers could do a single zoom with each other. But that doesn't dance too well. So they're better off if they can understand and see where they're going to go to blend into it as they do the call. Go back now to your title two-face line. This time dance it with a blend. Good dancers will blend. Weaker dancers who are just trying to understand the concept won't do that. They'll...
No, not really.
See, it doesn't dance too bad, but it's going to take very solid dancers to dance it that way. The others are going to do it the choppy way. But the idea here is to understand the concept, not necessarily that we would call a figure that doesn't dance that well. You've done it 3 or 4 times, yeah. Yeah. For the tape, let's establish that we all here think that from that setup, the stretch, turn and deal and roll, don't call it. It doesn't dance well. Okay. Any other comments? So the people that have not worked with stretch much understand the idea. That's the key. Not that you necessarily understand or use all these examples, but if you understand the difference between the two, that's the key.
Okay, art says we need a square. All lead to the middle. Here they come. Precision 8 dancers from...
Okay. All right, everybody quarter in and pass the ocean there. Okay, from parallel waves, you wanted a stretch... Okay, a stretch also. Well, of course, those coming to the center will go to the far center, so they just blend into that. Okay. Yeah, question? Right. It's a case of, think of it, in order to think of it in your mind as to what it is, think of it as do it normal, then stretch. In actual dancing of it, you're going to blend the stretch with the end of the call. If in that case that was all that you could do, if all that you can do is do the call normal and centers pass through, then you do it because that's all you can do. But if you can blend your centers pass through into doing the call, then you do that for danceability. So again, for thinking of it in your mind as to what it is, it's best to think of it as 2 distinct things. But when the dancers dance it, they're going to blend. They're going to blend on the C2 stretch also. The tidal wave in your stretched wave recycle. The far center 2 don't slough down and then do the recycle. Some dancers will do that, but it really should be danced all in one sweeping motion. Now, some dancers are so into this and have studied this so much, and they really understand the difference, that from once you say that formation in your stretched wave or line, boom, they're gone. They're done there unstretching, even if they don't have to. Now, that doesn't dance as well, but they're looking at it, I want to get through the call, I don't care how it looks dancing-wise, and maybe we can't blame them because it is kind of hard. A what? Well, that just gives you a facing line, and...
You break entirely out of the melody. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't sing harmonics all the way.
Well, everybody just make a parallel wave right there nearest to you. We have parallel waves. And the call is stretch, explode the wave. Right? Was that what you wanted? Oh, stretch, explode, and. Okay, do a stretch, explode, and, which gives us facing lines because the centers have to. And now we could. The call was do a square the bases. We could do that, or load the boat, or we can do anything in there. Okay, you don't have to do the whole square of the bases there. Okay, the key is that we use the correct terminology whenever we use the stretches, and that's what this whole exercise is. That we don't want a C2 or C3 usage, but we give the C1 terminology, or we don't give the C2 terminology and want a C1 usage. That we understand the differences between them. Anything else on the stretch? Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add on that? Or? Okay, we'll turn it over to Mike now for his portion here.
Don't wander too far. We're going to need you later on. In the course of calling challenge dances, we as callers are constantly confronted by the horns of a dilemma. That is to call a challenging, interesting dance without losing the smooth flowing quality of the dance. From this problem flows our two-pronged approach to calling challenge, citing and written material. Unfortunately, each has drawbacks. Written material can effectively assure one of covering the entire list, encountering all sorts of interesting positions and all call combinations, and at the same time assure the caller that no matter what the dancers do, he has a script that works. However, the major drawback is the danceability. No matter how accomplished the reader, the material does not have the same flow as cited material. But even more important and more subtle is the artificial barrier that it places between you and the dancers. I've noted the performances of myself and fellow callers, and it seems that once we start into the cards, the mic personalities, and no pun intended, that we project tend to disappear in our earnest effort to make sure the card is delivered correctly. We all know how much of the success of dancers at challenge is psychological. Whether a floor will place the trust in you to cajole them into dancing over their heads, or allow the fears of their image of you to incapacitate their judgment on even the simplest basics. The barrier we create by reading bars us from effectively establishing that rapport with the floor. On the other hand, the drawback to citing is obvious. We become dependent upon the setup that the dancers give us after the completion of the call. So we either don't push into hard subject areas, or we go where angels fear to tread and suffer the consequences by resolving with the wrong square. What I propose tonight is to examine a methodology by which I prepare to call cited material actually through the C3A level, but in which I am not entirely at the mercy of the dancers in front of me. First, in preparation for dances at any level, I take the approach that in using our square dance vocabulary, that I'm preparing a story. Each tip is a paragraph in that story, and every sequence is a sentence. And the basic fundamental dictate of every rule of writing is that a sentence contains one idea. The problem that every one of us has encountered, not only personally but dancing to beginning challenge callers, is the tendency to cram too much material into one sequence. The communication you attempt to achieve is thwarted by the information overload that you place upon the dancers. Each sequence that I try to call is centered around one little idea, one goodie, which is built around, whether it be a unique setup, a different call combination, or a good get-out. I keep lists of the list calls, each with a long or short series of problem areas which I wish to encounter when I'm calling that particular sequence. The consideration that I also write down is whether is there a particular call setup which is easier to see, a more cueable according to sex position, or an easier to resolve from position in case of an immediate need to resolve the floor. Now, the approach that I take is simply taking the calls and going through the list calls and finding procedures that I want to explore. For instance, on this sheet there was listed butterflies. From butterflies I wished as one problem to explore a butterfly trade by, or a butterfly cross and turn, or a butterfly cross chain through, rotary spin from butterflies. Any number of ideas there. Exploring a mini butterfly formation within the middle of an hourglass, probably called a moth. Concentric boxes from the butterfly kind of formation. Any number of different problem areas, all associated with just the idea of working in a butterfly. From there, I have 6 or 7 or 8 sequences. Now, I've built the idea around it. I have something meaty that I'm approaching with the sequence, but at the same time, I'm citing. I'm free to relate to the floor. I'm free to adjust to what the floor needs at any point in time. At the same time, I'm still exploring something meaty or interesting. What I'm proposing does not free you of preparation time, but what it does do is allow you the flexibility of sight calling with the positioning of written material. It even offers you the advantage of basically being able to reproduce the sequence, that is, to do the overs. Because since you have a prepared idea that you're exploring there, You can basically reconstruct the idea in the same way, same methodology, and be able to do the overs for the dancer that didn't understand it or missed it the first time. Combined with this idea, I also use certain sighting rules which I've developed for myself, which allow me to be more sure of the dancer's positions, simply because I know where they're supposed to be at the conclusion of the call. Therefore, I'm independent of what they give me, and in fact, I'm free to help to cue them into the spot. At this point, could I get 8 dancers? Or callers? Or fill in the blank? They at least gave you one girl, Ed. All the heads wheel through, please. Veer to the left. Tag the line. You don't have to clap. Face in. You guys want to try slide through, or you want to just let the ends touch a quarter and the center's left touch a quarter? Let's do that. Yeah, we'll cop out. Now, this is magic column setup. And when I'm sighting within magic columns, and I wish to call a magic column circulate once and a half, the dancers, of course, on many occasions, unless they're extremely competent, have troubles finding the handhold in the gray area where they're crossing from the center to the outside. Now, there's a crossing rule that says the center has the right of way. But I, as a sight caller, know that it's always the outside handhold that will give you the handhold that's in the gray area, the center area. So I always know that the outside handedness of my magic column, after the once and a half circulate, will tell me what the handedness is of the people in the gray area. So I'm not dependent upon seeing what the dancers give me after the call. I'm there ahead of them. Not only am I no longer dependent upon them, but I can help them into the correct spot. All 8 magic columns circulate once and a half. And you notice the people that have moved into the gray area have the right hands. Not only does this apply to a column of 8, but it also applies to the column of 6. It's the handedness of that outside handhold will give you the center box of 4 handhold. Now, what's really difficult for the average C1 dancer is realizing that within the magic column of 6, you're constantly getting the zigzag pattern as opposed to moving straight ahead, then zigging, then moving straight ahead, and so forth. So this way, his confusion is usually there. He'll grab right hands because he's used to grabbing right hands at the same spot. In this case, he will. Let's have this. Let's have the center 6 slither, please. That's good. Now, when they move, because I know that that handhold is a left handhold, they're going to have a left hand box of 4 in the middle, regardless of what the dancers attempt to give me. Center 6 magic column circulate once and a half. So we go once and a half, and I know that it's going to be a left hand box of 4, because the handedness of the outside grouping was left hand as well. And you see, as the instance showed there, I'm ahead of them. I'm able to cue them into the correct spot. Plus, I have the advantage of knowing where they've got to be at the conclusion of the call. Let the centers walk and dodge, and the outsides hinge. Many times when setting up T-bones, you want to set up a T-bone situation where you want to be able to work counter-rotates, walk and dodges, split circulates, so forth, and yet you shy away from it because you're not sure when you're going to have somebody crashing into somebody else, when you're actually within a funny box, whatever. What I can look in this 3-in-1 box that I have here, where I have 3 trailers and 1 leader, is in order to set up the box where I can confidently counter-rotate, walk and dodge and whatever, I simply check the handedness of the tandem unit. The inside hand of the tandem unit tells me what I have the facing people to touch. If they had a left shoulder in, they would left touch a quarter. Since they have a right shoulder in, have those facing touch a quarter. Now I have a T-bone box situation where everybody has the same handedness to the center of their box of 4. Therefore, I can counter-rotate a quarter freely, I can split circulate freely, I can walk and dodge freely, split checkmate, whatever. I can explore a number of different calls from the T-bone setup. I'm still sighting, I'm still there for their benefit, and at the same time I'm doing a lot of unique positioning. But I know that I can confidently call it from working from the knowledge. Each box of 4 split counter-rotate a quarter. Each box of 4 split circulate. nobody will be running or crashing into each other. But that's working again from knowledge. Just take a look. Each box of 4 shakedown. This usually ends up having a little bit of a problem. You also always know that from that shakedown you end up with the people that were formerly back-to-back facing. No, you do not end with a line. You have to be T-boned consistently. Ed, you're faced in. There you go. In again. Thank you. Now, so you see, working from the knowledge, though, is I'm able to help the floor again through difficult positioning. I can remain sighting and relating to the floor and not dependent upon the written material, and at the same time explore interesting positions. Let's spur your sets real quick and go back home, because I need to find some set rolls here. Good. Let the head spur off. Everybody pass through. The center star through. Now, with another T-bone setup, and particularly where we're looking at half circulates and what hand that gives people. Finding the outside tracks sometimes is difficult, particularly on the half a circulate. It's not so much for regular circulates, but it's on the half circulate where we have trouble with what the handhold may be. Now, with prepared material, you don't have the problem. With sighted material, you're sometimes at the mercy of the dancer. But watch what happens. Everybody split circulate once. Now, if we were to split circulate a half here, the way I identify it is that I look for the inside shoulder of the out-facing dancer, because it's his shoulder that they'll end up holding the hands with. And so therefore, I'm not dependent upon what they give me, but working from knowledge, I know just to look for that shoulder. That'll tell me the handhold. Do half of a split circulate. Notice that we end up with the inverted lines then, but I'm ahead of the game. Any hand quarter through. Now, would you identify the girls for me real quick? Oh, good. Pass through. Girls, step ahead. Thank you. That's good. In your block, do a partner trade. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to get into the blocks. Let's do this. Let the girls press ahead. That's good. Touch a quarter. Good. And the girls quarter left. And here's the box that you want to be in is a T-bone box that has 2 leads, 2 trailers. Okay? The one neat thing about this kind of T-bone box, again, working from knowledge, is that any time that you're in this T-bone box and you apply a call that normally ends up in diamonds, which half of a split circulate would, it ends up normalizing to waves or lines. Any call that ends up in waves or lines ends up in diamonds when you're in this kind of lead trailer T-bone box. Now, the situation that we got here is, again, look at the inside shoulder of the out-facing person. That'll be the handhold. Half split circulate. There it is. Everybody 2/3 recycle. Girls quarter right. Okay. Do an all 8 circulate. Now this will be point to point. Oh well. Again, applying. Well, let's do a hard call. Applying the idea. Peel the top is a call that normally ends up in an ocean waves. Since I have a lead trailer T-bone box, I know that it's going to end up in a diamond. Peel the top, so the leads peel away. Don't forget to move up the quarter, as the others did the cast 3. And here's our diamond setup. So, working from knowledge, I know that as soon as I see that lead trailer T-bone box, I know if I call a diamond call, it's going to resolve it to waves or lines. If I call a wave call, it's going to end up moving it into diamonds. Flip the diamond. Can we identify the girls again, please? Good. 2/3 recycle. Girls press ahead and trade. Now, what I want to do specifically is analyze how I set up these little worksheets for a particular call. Everybody in your block touch a quarter. Now, blocks are one of the easiest setups to cite for 2 reasons. First off, no matter what you do within the block, you have the same 4 people. So if you can keep one block intact, then you can pull the square together. Secondly, existing in your block setup is a diagonal that it will always reform along the lines of. And so knowing that as a caller, if not just for dancer knowledge, The dancers can help set themselves back up in the correct spots by looking at the diagonal, but I, as a caller, can look at that diagonal and be there ahead of time to help them set up back along that diagonal. If I know that I'm going to call something extremely sophisticated or hard in the block setup, I can check the diagonal before I call it, and then I'm there ahead of time to pull my group of 4 back together so that we can reform along the diagonal, and there I'm able to help correct their mistakes, at the same time be able to call hard choreography. Now, we have a block situation here with the girls on the interior line and the boys on the outside line in each box of 4, right? Now, that's a setup where I will call in your block, remake the setup. Now, remake the setup involves a little bit of interesting choreography because it has a momentary ocean wave in the middle of the call. It involves some sophistication on the dancer's part because they have to remove the distortion in order to perform the call, then return again to this distorted setup. Now, from this position, I analyze that the easiest spot for me to call it from, since the hardest part to me is getting the people to initiate the call. So I have the girls in the center, and I like to call that the lowest communication denominator. You can talk about bells and bows, you can talk about heads and sides, but their sex is one thing we can talk to instantly. So I can cue the girls to slide over to the guys in their block. Do that. Slide to your right, girls. Now, remake the setup. Quarter, half, 3/4. And now that I have them listening to me, it's very easy for me to get the inside people to slide back to the left to reform the block. Plus, you have the added benefit of just moving 4 people in order to remove the distortion. You only have to move 4 of them back. Automatically, 4 people are in the correct spots on the floor. So that, again, I have the advantage of reconstructing the diagonal and the group. Everybody in your block quarter in. That's good. Everybody in your block archy star 3. Now, I have the boys on the inside track, the girls on the outside track here, right? Now, I'm going to call in your block square chain the top. Now, that involves an extreme amount of sophistication because to perform the call, I have to bring the insides to the outsides, okay? But to finish the call, to reform the block again, I have to slide laterally away from each other. So I figured that the hardest part about performing square chain the top in the block is not the start, but the finish. So that I make sure that at the finish, the insidemost people will be the guys or the girls or whatever. And since I know that square chain the top is actually reverse swap around position-wise, I now have it lined up so that the boys will be the inside people at the conclusion of the call. So that when they're finally together, I can cue the guys away from the girls to reform my block setup. Yeah. Yeah, boys, please. Thank you. Yeah. Just visualize in your minds where a reverse swap around would place the people. And it would put the boys on that inside line, inside column setting. Okay? So, in your block, square chain the top. So, right, pull by insides, walk to the outsides. Do your left spin the top. 3/4, the ends move up. Then your left turn through. And have the boys slide away from their adjacent person in order to reform the block. Now, it's hard for even really good dancers to perform, but I'm there to be able to help them to cue because I'm working from a position of knowledge as opposed to having to wait to see where the dust clears in order to figure out where the dancers have got to go. Those are just some examples of performing in this kind of methodology. No. Actually, it would have to be to your left shakedown. Would put you back in the same position. Right. No. Yeah, but he wasn't. Yeah, because that was a she. Yeah, yeah. So your left shakedown would return you back to the same spot. Yeah. Right. Well, if I do the left shakedown and then quarter in again, I'd have a big deal. By analyzing and organizing your calls in this manner, you can help your flow, your flexibility, your danceability, without sacrificing the material or your control of the dance situation. Any questions?
What I want to try to show you.
Ed, I believe you had some other. Yes. Yeah, either the stretch or the. Yeah. Yes, since we apparently have 8 dancers. Yeah. Well, yeah. What I usually do is that I catalog this. The question was, is that does one piece of paper represent a tip? No. What I do is that I've gone through the list and I leave additional spaces when I have other choreographic ideas that I can add that theme around a certain call. And I basically add to that call's repertoire of called ideas, or call ideas, sequence building ideas, okay? And I catalog those. Then when I go to the convention, before I call a tip, or when I go to do a dance, before I call a tip, I simply take a brief look at some of the call areas. That refreshes my mind. Now, depending upon how great your memory is and how well organized that is, you can work off the cuff. It can be far more detailed if you want to have more calling notes about it. Sometimes it's just a situation that I've called so much of these that I just need a little word or a note simply to key that off in my mind. But before the tip, I simply organize real quickly and pick out, well, I'll do a couple of these, two of these, one of these, if I'm not deciding to theme the entire tip around one particular call. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, for instance, this sheet of paper has magic columns, O's, and percolates on it. And it probably has about, 20 sequences worth of call ideas on simply one piece of paper. Yeah.
Okay, here's another one.
Well, I'm not, there's nothing wrote, it's all cited at that point. But as far as you just free-flowing creative site, in fact, chances are I'll probably begin the tip with something that's memorized gimmick-wise, and that's a 2 or 3 call sequence or whatever. Then maybe flow just with creative sight for a tip or for a sequence or two, and then eventually approach some of these choreographic ideas once I feel like that I have them warmed up and have their minds back on dancing again and what I want to approach. Also, there's a degree of difficulty built into that too. You might want to start to explore a sophisticated idea like the stretches, but you simply start out with something that involves, like stretch 2/3 recycle from regular ocean waves. That doesn't involve that much extrapolation from doing a normal stretch recycle. But then when you start getting into stretch shakedown and other calls along that line, then that involves a little bit more brain work, and you want to build as opposed to do that in the first part of a tip. It's just like building a story, building a paragraph. It's all a language, and the key is communication.
Now, Tip's going to show you some of the complex
Mm-hmm.
Stop and show you. Okay. Oh, sorry, guys. I don't mean to be
Well, let's try the setup first. Everybody in your block, quarter in. Girls, whoa, I'll get there. Yeah, in your block, quarter in, and the girls press ahead. That's good. Everybody pass through. All the boys right loop 1. Good. Parallelogram, switch to wave.
But basically, in stop and go.
And is this particular setup you want, or you want it the other way? You want that two-face line setup, or you want the other two-face line? Okay, in your parallelogram, trade circulate, ding, ding, ding.
Stop and go.
Yeah, you got a long ding, ding, ding there, though. Yeah, that's good. Now, okay. Yeah. So, from this position, you wish to call out wheel and, yeah, that's the correct term. I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate for this level. Yeah, either C1 or C2. Out wheel, I normally associate it with, 3, John, wouldn't you? Yeah, because you see, well then that would be out wheel across, okay, because that you're trying to move both positions in behind your positions, as opposed to doing a wheel and deal, which in effect has them wheeling around there, and they're not moving both positions over. You just would overlap by 1 instead of by 2. Cross fold would then do it. Yeah. No, in and of itself. Either out cross fold or out wheel across. Yeah. Yeah.
Girls partner 3 and roll. Girls pass through right roll to a wave. All same sections to cast 3. all the boys.
Yeah, which it really, if you had them move to that position, then it would have been a wheel across.
Load, look at the boys. Touch
Yeah.
quarter. All right.
Any other?
I consider that to be unacceptable. Right? To me, that's unacceptable. Right? Now, if we have back in parallel waves again, I'm going to call relatively the same thing, what I would call more acceptable in that area. And the difference is, I think you will see, is I'm going to cut off the amount of time that they need to do this identifying. I guess I give them dance a little
Yes,
bit
sir.
more credit. I don't want them to stand around.
Oh, okay. Well, it's simply the terminology of out wheel across means that the out facers are doing the wheel across. Okay, as the in facers will then take the other call. Right. Yeah. And it's simply a way of neutralizing that setup.
Okay, and the wave 6. Okay. Lady, that's totally unacceptable. The caller is being
Well, it was a parallelogram. Yeah, we were. Let this. Okay, let's go through it again. Centers pass through. Everybody pass in. Pass through. Now, here's your line, right? Have the bows right loop 1. And so, since the bells are stationary, and remember, you see, the process, well, it's not that, it's not that strange an idea. What normally happens is, many times, is that you forget to add one to the other side. You're in the process of removing one person from one end and moving to the other end, and you forget you've done that simultaneously on the other side. And in reality, there's a number of calls that do that move full position one way is also moving in a full position the other way. That's what makes us offset by 2. Let the in facers right loop 1 again, so that neutralizes our setup again and puts us in the lines facing out. Everybody partner trade. Each box of 4 archy star through and veer to the left. That's good. There's confusion, I think, a lot of times in our spring dance choreography of what truck is, what press is, what +1 and +2 is, and realize that when you do lateral type movements, when we do a wheel and deal, please. Now, there's a concept on the 3 list, and it sometimes gets utilized at 2 as well, is that we have a lateral movement of +1 and +2. +1 only moves you a half a spot. But because you have both people moving different directions, then half spot this way, half spot that way, and you offset by 1 spot total. Okay? Do a +1, which means you slide over to the left a half spot. Okay, so that was your couple flow. And you're offset by 1 full position because you've gone a half one way, half the other. If we had gone +2, then you would have slid over 1 full spot. Don't touch. You would have slid over 1 full spot, but then that offsets the whole thing completely because it's one direction, 1 the other direction. So as couples extend to the 2-face line there, good. Also realize that presses, for instance, are full spots as opposed to the half spot, okay? But realize that within our line wave choreography that the spots end up being physically farther apart feeling than our spots in a column. So a press from a line wave setup feels radically different, feels much farther than a press from a column setup. Have the ends press ahead. And you notice that the trailing person goes all the way over to the other line. It feels like such a great distance. Can you guys unpress now? Okay, good. Bend the line. Touch a quarter. In each box of 4, have the trailers press out. And you notice that they moved a full spot, but that spot wasn't as far, simply because physically the way the dancers dance it, it feels radically different for them. So what you do is that you find the dancers can do this well, but they can't do it from the lines as well because they don't realize that full spot is all the way across the square. Everybody finish a turn and deal. Truck again is a full spot. Extend is a half spot. Half circulate is a half spot. Circulate is a full spot. So you need to make sure that you keep careful track of what takes you half spots and what takes you full spots and full positions. But realize that many times within the column, that the column spots are not as far apart as the wave or line spots.
Let's have the boys circulate. Ladies pass the ocean. Boys
Yeah. Yes, Bruce.
Everybody explode away. Okay, boys do a partner trade. All right, now here's another action that anticipates the unequal formation. In, don't do this call. The term ends with in. Sometimes allows for a lot of fraction.
Mhm.
Do something like this, and then.
That's right, yes. Bruce pointed out that the course of extend and our shortcutting extend really cheats the dancers out of a full appreciation of where we're going on those kind of calls. When we extend the tag, actually everyone is functioning, not just the center wave in a quarter tag position. Everybody is moving forward. And so that's why, once again, it's a case of outside people moving ahead a half spot and the inside most people moving ahead a half spot. They're actually meeting, as opposed to people that the way they actually practically dance it is that the people in the middle come all the way out to the outside people. So you get a confusing feeling from the dancers of not knowing how far an extend is as opposed to a press, how far a half circulate is as opposed to a circulate. Yes, Ken. Everybody pass in. Any particular setup or, yeah. Well, yeah, okay. Ken asked a call about grand chain 8. And of course, you have the 3 different positions that grand chain 8 can be applied from. The most common position, which is actually the second one in the spot, is from the lines. Okay. And there's several different methodologies and approaches to calling teaching grand chain 8. I personally find most effective, and John can have his rebuttal, I find most effective the pull by, moving on to the next and stepping to a left-hand wave. And then within each line of 4, the centers kind of halfway courtesy turn the ends into a facing box of 4. Okay? Now, you don't want to get carried away. It's just a very quick little courtesy turn. Yeah, I think you guys need to be sashayed over there. Yeah, because you overpowered him. Which, again, is a situation that happens in side calling C2. You'll see somebody overpower the other person on the grand chain 8. So knowing ahead of time that you can visualize the center turning the end, you can, again, correct the situation for the dancer there. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Bruce pointed out to whoever you're with, you end up facing. That's correct. Again, applying it, we can also apply it from the 8 chain through position. But basically the same idea occurs is that the centers can step to the left-hand wave and have the center turn the end into that courtesy turned action, okay? Grand chain 8. So the centers will step to the left-hand wave and then have the center turn the end in that fudgy little courtesy turn action. That's the only spot where a pure courtesy turn will take place. Now, the center 4 people arc starring through, and from this beginning double pass-through is the final place where we can apply the grand chain 8, which is to pull by, step to the left-hand wave, center turn the end. I know that John, in the course of the C2 definitions, also looks at it from the viewpoint of pulling by, moving on to the next, turning your back to the adjacent person, and doing a pure courtesy turn. Now, what that has the advantage thereof, let's try it from these lines here. Do the grand chain 8 that way. Pull by, move on to the next, turn your back on the person adjacent, then do a pure courtesy turn. Okay? Now, that has the advantage of making the courtesy turn real pure, 180-degree type move. The problem is that you sometimes get that jerky click, click, click choreography of first we got to click into this spot and then we have to reverse the body flow and go the other way. Everybody pass in, please. Another application that I have seen done, again as an additional teaching hint, is you may have to help me here because I don't do this one very often, is pull by, move on to the next, step to the left-hand wave, hinge, and the leads turn back in body flow. Now, that gives you that will also give you the roll pattern, so it doesn't hurt that way. And yeah, that may be another methodology that might be easiest for you to think of. I have explored that a little bit, and I can't really find anything wrong that I object to, except that it does tend to lose the courtesy turn nature of grand chain 8, and therefore, if you have a call that needs to flow into the next thing, like a Dixie style or a flutter wheel or whatever, then you don't have that there because you don't have that leading action of the bow with the bell. But yeah, on the other hand, it does clear that up real quick. Yeah. Yeah. But again, we've progressed many times in the course of calls, particularly when calls have been written ages and ages ago when we had very, very primitive methodologies of dealing with things. And now that we have other ways of describing setups, I mean, it's for all practical purposes, we can describe a Dixie style to an ocean wave as a pull by and a left touch a quarter. And I think that describes it far more than that real primitive setup of trying to swing somebody into the middle of a left-hand wave. And so it depends, we can say it better now that we have touch a quarter available.
When you're going to look at it, then
Yeah, it's a far more exact way of saying it.
Line spacing.
It's 11 o'clock. I think that's the witching hour.